let us start our session for today. Ladies and gentlemen, I again welcome you all from PMI Bangladesh chapter. What a brilliant day today. I'm really excited to have Mr. Lee with us. I cannot express my feelings. I'm kind of overexcited what to do, what to say. Because Mr. Lee is one of the founder PMP, and PMP is by far the most renowned certification or professional certification across this industry, across the globe. No matter what, if you are from IT, if you are from construction, if you are from any industry, there is no other certificate than PMP that is recognized across this globe. And of course, Mr. Lee is one of the founder of PMP. What a feat that we are with Mr. Lee today to hear from him. Let me say something about his life. Mr. Lee has logged 50 long years of project management experiences and is considered one of the world's topmost thought leaders on project management methods and how they can be utilized to create and sustain value-added leadership and collaboration activities. He is one of only 70 in the world to receive the honor of PMI Fellow. I repeat, he is one of only 70 in the world to receive the honor of PMI Fellow. Mr. Lee is the past president of Central Ohio PMI chapter, and as I mentioned, was one of the founders of PMP Credential. His book, Project Management, The Common Sense Approach, is a bestseller in project management field. Mr. Lee was a project management evangelist at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and General Electric. And at the age of 37, he was named VP of Staff and Organizational Development for one of the largest contract research organizations, where he was responsible for creating and implementing a leadership development program focused on improved performance for project managers and supporting functional managers. During his decades of platform training, Mr. Lambert has provided learning opportunities to more than 50,000 professionals from 23 different countries. He regularly called upon to provide keynote presentations in leadership, communications, and other project management topics. Today, he will be sharing some of his experiences on strategic designing and project delivery, bridging the gap. Before I invite him to take virtual stage, I would like to share for everyone's convenience that he will be taking questions at the end of his presentation slide. So I'm sure you will have any questions. Please write on the chat box so that we can take a question after he finishes his presentation. And everyone is requested to be muted and put your video off to save the bandwidth while he starts his presentation. And of course, during Q&A, of course, we will have more chance to interact with Mr. Lee. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Lee on the virtual stage. Mr. Lee, strategic design and project delivery, bridging the gap. Bridging the strategic design and project delivery, bridging the gap. Mr. Lee Lambert, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful introduction. That makes me start to think about how old I am. Been involved with this project management stuff a long time, but the information I want to share with you today is extremely current. I think we in project management have to kind of earn our stripes every day. And I was at the Philadelphia Global Conference last year, and Sunil Prasher, our new CEO and president of PMI, has become enamored with this whole idea of what he calls the project economy. And he talked about it, he presented about it, he does it on LinkedIn. It's a big topic for Sunil. He believes in it wholeheartedly, as do I. But I think about it in a little different way. And that is, ever since I was a little boy many moons ago, I've always thought that everything is a project, and so therefore everyone is a project manager. So whether you do project management in a formal way to support your family, or whether you do project management in a way to execute little family projects, it's all project management. And so I started thinking about this idea of the strategic design and project delivery, because it seems what's happened over the years is that we've started to focus so much on the project. And I think PMI and people like me are guilty of that a little bit, because we've sort of overemphasized the scope, time, cost, the triple constraint on projects, to the extent that we sometimes forget that the reason we're doing that project is to add value to the organization. So there's for whatever project you take on, there is some strategic contribution that project is most likely intended to deliver. So I thought, well, we ought to take a look at this idea of strategic design and project delivery. So I came up with this thought, and then when the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden the world changed and no one was traveling and no one was going anywhere, I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I live and breathe on making these presentations to chapters and to people around the world. And then I realized, with the computer, what the heck? I don't even need to leave my studio. I can talk with massive numbers of people and never leave home. So I decided I was going to offer up to the PMI chapters in the world. There's 301 chapters and about 4 that are on the border of being approved. So we're over 300 chapters. My chapter, the Central Ohio chapter, was chapter number 3, behind San Francisco and Houston. So we've been in it a long time, but I thought, well, I'll offer it up and see if there's any interest. Oh my goodness, the interest was overwhelming. I couldn't find enough days in the week to get everybody scheduled. So up till this point in time, Bangladesh is my 56th presentation of this information, and the feedback has been very good and the questions have been very good. So as I go through the material, I'm going to present it in a way that you're not necessarily familiar with. There's not going to be any PowerPoint slides, or there's going to be slides that have a message ingrained in them. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you obviously learn some things from my presentation today. So here's one thing I got to set up for you, is that we need to make sure we understand this, that the responsibility for our projects staying connected to the strategic objectives, which I'll talk about in a moment, it's not dependent upon which methodology we're using. This slide tries to represent the fact that back when I started in project management, 1966, and I know some of you probably weren't even born when I started, but in 1966, we used, and with General Electric, we used the predictive model of project management, the basic fundamental model of you define the scope, you plan the project, you have a schedule, you get people, and you get the project done. And the beauty of back in those days, and this is one of the things I miss about those days, is that when we got a project from GE, we also got a project team assigned to us, and they were dedicated to that project. So the difficulties that come with matrix management weren't really a big issue at that point in time. So we were dedicated project management people, and that's the way we got our projects done. Well, as we started to expand the knowledge base of project management, we began to realize that you can't manage all projects the same way, and we had a big preponderance of IT projects. About 70% of an organization's budget is focused on IT projects. So we started to expand the ability to manage IT projects, and we found that the predictive model wasn't quite as effective with IT projects in terms of delivering good quality products to the strategic objectives. So we began to evolve into this. Well, first it was just called waterfall, but now, of course, we're into the world of Agile. Agile has taken the world by storm. It's everywhere. Our discipline, Agile, our certification for Agile, it's all expanded at a rapid pace. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't really change the responsibility I have to make sure that as we get that project done, that we are maintaining tight linkage to the strategic objectives. So no matter what methodology you're using, no matter how you're going about executing your projects in your organization, you must keep in mind that if it wasn't for some strategic objective, that project probably wouldn't exist. So let me go a little farther with that, because I don't think everybody understands this idea of strategy. It's a big deal, and I'll make a big deal out of it all day long. Is that we have to understand that strategy is what makes the organization go. It's how we develop into a better, more effective, more productive, more profitable organization. So the strategy comes about.
We cannot hear Mr. Lee.
We have to understand strategy. And what that means is we have to know where it comes from and how it fits into what we do at the project management level. Because at the project management, at least when I was working on that, in the environment of actually producing projects back up until 1984, I was doing the same kind of things you guys probably are doing. But we never talked about strategy. I can't remember a single conversation about strategy. So what you have to understand is about once a year, people at the highest levels of the organization, let's just call it the C level. That seems to be terminology that's caught on. So we got the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, all the C people. They go away, and they go away to immerse themselves in the idea of planning what the organization needs to achieve in the coming time frame. Usually it's a year, but in the coming time frame, what the organization has to achieve to be successful, to further the growth and effectiveness of the organization. Well, of course, the first thing they do is identify what I'll call strategic objectives. So maybe the organization wants to increase revenue a certain percentage. Maybe they want to decrease costs a certain percentage. Maybe they want to increase the number of certain classifications of skill sets. And whatever those strategic objectives are, people bring them to the table, and then they get debated, and eventually they get selected as the strategic objectives the organization will use to guide its progress in the coming time frame. Well, here's what I mean. We're not in the game yet as project people. We're not in the game. We don't get to play in the C-level game. But once the C-level people are done and they've identified strategic objectives, what we have to recognize is that those strategic objectives spawn the projects that we work on. In other words, out of one significant project or strategic objective for the organization, that may spawn 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 projects. And that we sometimes now we call those portfolios, where we group like things together. So we've got portfolio of 6, 8 projects that support one strategic objective. So we then start to realize, well, wait, here, let's see where I fit. My project is an important input into the achievement of this strategic objective. So it starts to take on a new life rather than just scope, time, cost. And yeah, we got it done. We now have to include in that thinking scope, time, cost, and strategic connection. Is it contributing to the strategic objective, what was anticipated? So the project manager's role is probably, I mean, and maybe I'm biased here, but I think it's probably one of, if not the most important position in the organization, because we deliver value. That's what projects deliver, value. And so if we don't stay linked to the strategic objectives, then we may not be delivering value. We may be delivering projects, but we may not be delivering this distinct value that was anticipated for that project. So we have to pay attention to it in a little bit different way. You have some choices to make. Oh. All right, my advance is not working. When we changed over, am I back to the presenter? This is not, it's not, advance is not operating. Huh, let me see what I can do about that. I'm going to stop sharing and go back and see if we can fix this. Okay, let's get on here, screen share. All right, there we go. That was easy. Technology, you gotta love it. Now, what I was saying was that we, as project people, if we don't realize and recognize this connection that we have to the strategy, if we just stick our head in the sand and don't pay any attention to that, then we start to find that we're falling short on achieving our strategic objectives because we're not managing the projects in a way that add the most value. Now, this introduces another reason for change. It introduces another, come on, leave me alone, just let me do my scope, time, cost. But I tell you, you can't stick your head in the sand. And those that pull their head out and focus on maintaining this connection with strategy are the project managers who advance, who get bigger and better projects, get more meaningful projects to do, enhance your reputation and all the things that go along with that. So you can't just ignore it. You can't ignore the strategy, for goodness sake. And so you got to pull your head out, make sure you're aware of the connection. So, but this produces some interesting problems, okay? First problem is, well, let me say a couple things. We got this project charter, you know, that's the PMI version, the PMBOK version of a project authorization document, project charter. Well, one of the things that hasn't been on the project charter in the past is what's the strategic objective that this project supports? In other words, instead of having to wonder, we want to call it out right up front that your project supports strategic objectives number 3. So I know now what the linkage needs to be, okay? But there's another piece that's not on there called the prioritization, the priority of your project. And that's going to have relevance to the strategic objective that it supports. But the fact of the matter is, because we are dealing in a multi-project environment, lots of projects, and because we're dealing in the darn matrix, where we have to go beg, borrow, and steal to get resources to conduct our project, Well, one of the only ways you're going to have any leverage over the resource pool owner is to be able to link your request for resources to the execution of a strategic objective. In other words, if you got 10 projects and your project is project number 1, you're going to get the people you need. If your project's number 9, the chances are you might not get exactly the people you need. Therefore, you need to know, what adjustments do I need to make to continue to provide the input to the strategic objective? So the resource availability is determined by the importance of the project. So what you want is you all want to work on number 1 priority projects. Well, there's a downside to that for some people. I think it's an upside, but some people say it's down. If I got project priority number 1, I'm going to get a lot of attention. There's a lot of visibility on that project. Well, for me, that's what I want. I want to be visible because I want to be able to demonstrate what I can do as a project manager to improve this organization. But so the thing is, you see, all the C-level people, they think their project is priority 1. And they believe that because they're working in their silo. We've tried to break down this silo thinking, but we've not been successful yet. We need to think horizontally across the organization, but instead we're still looking at vertical silos. So the prioritization is important. Well, the only way you're going to get it is, but to tell you the truth, is by asking those C-level people, where does this project fit in the overall hierarchy of your strategic objective? And then they have to give some thought to that. Now, I'll give you an example. I had 2 very, very important functional organizations that molded my career. I spent 11 years with General Electric in the early days, and then I spent some time, a lot of time, important time, with IBM. So I've got a couple of good reference points. Those reference points found that if I don't ask about the priority, if I don't get involved in determining the priority, then it's all going to be assumed to be priority 1. Example, General Electric, I was getting ready to leave GE, and they had a few odds and ends they wanted me to clean up before I left. One of them was to review the annual business plan. Now, that annual business plan was made up of what they called at GE mission critical projects. Okay, mission critical. Now that means that is implied that those are important for the organization to be successful. So that was my first touching with strategic objectives. We didn't have any idea that's what they were called at the time, but the fact of the matter was the prioritization of the project sort of pointed out what the strategic objectives would be. But when I reviewed the document, it was a good document, mission critical. I had 25 mission critical for the next fiscal year. And I reviewed that, and the scope was pretty well defined on all of them. It had some estimates of time and money. And so I read through that and spent probably a couple days really comprehensively reviewing their project plan for the following year. And so I got all done, and I was impressed, but there was something missing. Then it hit me. So I asked the CEO, I said, but look, I love the projects you got identified. There's some good ones. But I said, I didn't see anywhere the priority. So is the priority that I see the same as the order in which you've listed the projects? And the CEO said, oh, no, that's just a random list of the projects. The priorities are on the second page. So I turned over the second page, and sure enough, that's where they'd list their priorities. And here's what this is the truth now, I'm not kidding. Project number 1 was priority number 1. Project number 2 was priority number 1. project number 3, and so on. And so I mean, that short circuited. I'm going like, wait a minute, this can't be. So I went back to them and suggested that they needed to find out what the real priorities were, because it was going to dictate how they executed all of these projects. Because we knew at the time we only had resources to support about 18 to 20 projects. So that means there's 5 projects that are going to be in a waiting line in case resources become available. So that prioritization was extremely critical. So they spent about a week going through it, trying to refine it, trying to get the order in which they would contribute to the success of the organization. And finally, when they called me back in, they said, we've taken a look at that, and we see what you're saying, and here's what we've come up with. Well, I looked at it, and I was impressed. First time I'd ever seen an organization actually pay attention to anything I said. And it said, so project number 1, which was a different project than was previously number 1, project number 1 was priority number 1. Project number 2 was priority 1A, and project number 3 was 1B. So, and I just laughed, and it was hopeless. I mean, it was obvious. This is back in the 70s, and project management hadn't really taken the world by storm yet. And so I realized there wasn't enough time in my tenure to fix that. But the fact of the matter is, now it's in the 2020s, and there is time, and there's an importance to identifying what these prioritization issues are, and so that we can list them in say in my portfolio. I've got 7 projects. I know going in, there's a probability that all 7 are not going to get done. Well, I want to make darn sure the top 5 get done. And so I've got to pursue this idea of identifying prioritization. Okay, because if you don't, it's going to be, I don't know if you're familiar over in Bangladesh, we got a comedian here in the States called Larry the Cable Guy, and his recognized statement that he always uses is, get her done. What do you want me to do? Get her done. And that's sort of the way we operate in our projects. If we're not careful, we just get her done. In other words, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. There's a million sayings. The fact of the matter is, we've got to get these done. And the only way you're going to get them done is to ask, is to define, is to help senior level managers, the C-level, help them understand what project management can do for them. It can make sure that you get the right projects done during that period of time, that you support the strategic objectives to the highest degree possible. So get her done. Find out what your priorities are, because here's what it does for you. This is the beauty of what it does for you. When you're in a tight situation on projects and you've got to go to the engineering resource pool, in the matrix, you go to the engineering resource pool and you say, I need 3 subject matter experts. And the resource pool owner says, well, yeah, that'd be nice. Everybody wants subject matter experts, but we don't have any. We got entry level. We got some young people here we can give you. Well, here's where it comes in. Then you're able to say something like this. Listen, sir. I don't know if I mentioned to you or not, but this project is number 1 project in the organization. It's the most important project in support of the strategic objectives that we're doing this year. Well, all of a sudden, the conversation changes, because when that resource pool owner finds out your project is priority number 1, he's going to make, or she is going to make some modifications to the allocation base. And all of a sudden, you get your 3 subject matter experts. Not because you're cute, not because you're nice, but because you've linked it to the strategy of the organization. And the resource pool owner doesn't want to be the one that says, oh gosh, if I'd only known. They don't want to be the one that gets held up as the reason we didn't agree on this strategic objective. So keep that approach in mind. So in order to do this, you see, when we look at strategic design, project delivery, you got to look at it holistically. You have to look at the total organization, not just your little project. you got to look at the total organization, so a holistic view. So what we're trying to do is to create an ability to do that, an ability to operate within the strategic boundaries so that we can get the most important projects done in the shortest period of time to contribute to the objectives that we've stated. So what we do is we've created what I call here, for the fun of it, is called a strategy office. Well, that strategy office's responsibility is to maintain the strategic linkage. In other words, maintain the linkage between the strategic objectives that the C-levels define and the projects that are being conducted within the project management organization. PMO helps in this regard because it keeps things focused. Portfolios help in this regard because it keeps those focused on specific objectives. But no matter what approach you're going to use, you've got to remember that you have to integrate vertically. The vertical integration comes via the work breakdown structure, that what I consider to be the foundation of all things project management. So vertically, we break all the work down till we can get down to the work package level, where we can assign resources, we can identify costs, we can identify time. So the WBS gives us the vertical hierarchy, and that used to be our goal, was to get a good work breakdown structure that we could use as a mechanism to execute the project effectively. Well, that's in an isolated case where your project is what you're dealing with. Well, now in this expanded environment of strategic objective connection, or linkage, if you want to use that term, we also have to recognize we have to have a horizontal integration. So when we look at the project and we start to think about the resource allocations, we also understand we've got to be sensitive to or aware of the commitments that the strategic that the resource owners pool have made, and how that integrates with my project. So if I need 3 subject matter experts, as I said, and horizontally I look across the horizontal availability of resources, I can see, wait, there aren't 3 subject matter experts available. Now we have a good discussion point. Now we can have even a negotiation based on the priority of my particular project. So we want to establish the capability. You're not going to do this without automated support. Now, the term that's floating around a lot these days is PPM, Project Portfolio Management. There's lots of them around. I've been working with one in Dublin, Ireland for a bit because I like some of the things that they do. But they're everywhere. I mean, they're all over the place. So you need to understand, eventually you'll need one of those systems, those processing systems, to effectively use the information that we're talking about today. And I'll say a little bit more about that later on. But we want to establish that to the best effect possible. Well, in order to really do a good job at this, because they tend not to realize how many people are involved in a project, how many different people are involved directly or indirectly in a project. And so one of the key responsibilities of the project manager is to create the stakeholder management plan. In other words, all of these people from all these various functions are all coming together to get a project done. Well, the communications becomes the big issue. In fact, I happen to think in project management, communication is the issue. But so it becomes a big issue. So what we did in the 5th edition of the PEM book, we actually added a new chapter called Stakeholder Management. That's how important we think it is. And so I want to just kind of touch on a few things for stakeholder management that you should be aware of. First of all, above the heads of these people that you see are the control stakeholders. These are the people who have the ability to authorize or stop your project. They may not be the C-level, they may be their designated people, but the fact of the matter is somebody's got control over your project. There may be more than one, there may be 2 or 3 or 4. We want to identify who they are, because remember, the stakeholder management plan identifies who the stakeholders are, what type of stakeholder they are, and then most importantly, what form and format and frequency of delivering communications will take place. So we've got the control stakeholder, okay? Limited in number, but critical in terms of keeping them informed. I've actually had in my career a project canceled by someone I didn't even know was interested in the project. That's how badly I did it. So I don't want you to make that mistake. So then we go to the next level, which is the level I work at as a project manager. And this is called the impact or influence stakeholder. This is anyone who could have an impact on or have an influence on my project. So that obviously that's the entire project team. Anybody working on the project by definition falls into that category. But there's a lot of others that also need to be considered, like the silo resource pool manager. Back to my engineering example. If he or she has people working on your project, then he or she also needs to be kept informed of how that is progressing. In other words, if there's a problem with the engineering environment, if slipping in the schedule and the engineering side, that individual needs to know that. So we want to have them be active participants in the stakeholder management process, okay? So that one's a little more easily identified, but it's bigger than most of the people think about it. Bigger meaning more people involved. Now the last one is underneath the on the bottom of this slide, and it's not identified either. It's called the information stakeholder. Now the information stakeholder is not working on your project, doesn't have anything to do with your project, not involved in it in any way whatsoever, but they are interested in what's going on on your project. And so they want to sort of keep track of what's going on for a lot of reasons. Maybe they anticipate getting a project similar to yours in the future, so they want to kind of see how it's going for your project. They want to be aware if you run into problems, they want to be able to understand how you resolve those, so if it's necessary, they'll be in a position that they can capitalize on that in the future. So what the information stakeholder really is conducting a live project review, or what we call, what do we call that at the end of the project? You know, when you recap the project and all of a sudden you got all this information. I think we call it a closeout report. So we're beginning to prepare a closeout report virtually as the project progresses. Now, you see the strategic objective that here would be not, your organization's not going to be the linkage. The linkage is going to be a future project that's going to be done 20% better, faster, cheaper, because we observed what was being done on a previous project. So this information stakeholders report. And I'm going to give you an example. I don't think, probably not too many of you have worked on a project that ended up in this big of a benefit strategically, but let me give it to you real quickly. Because I mean, I was hired to manage a project for a company called Behringer Mannheim, a wholly owned company that resided really in Mannheim, Germany, by the Engelhorn family, but their offices were located in Castleton, Indiana. They needed a miracle project to be conducted. They needed a new blood glucose monitoring diabetic in-home use product developed in 18 months. Usually took 3 years, but the pressure on the market was so extensive that they had decided we need this done in 18 months. So they hired me. Somehow they thought I could do it. Well, we got it done. I'll tell you that in fast. That doesn't spoil the story. The fact of the matter is we got it done in 18 months. It was written up as a miracle project in magazines. And so this is why it's important to understand what the heck does stakeholder management have to do with that? Well, let me show you. When I selected my people from their organization, it was going to be a dedicated project. When I selected the people, I selected 25 chemists out of a pool of 100 chemists. So 25 working for me on the big project, the miracle project, and 75 are just doing whatever the heck they do, okay? Well, that bothered some of the people in the 75 group because they'd been with the organization a long time. They're thinking, wait a minute, I should be on the big project, on the important project. So I thought, well, I better get this ironed out before it causes a problem. So I decided to get the two chemistry groups together every Friday for 4 weeks, every Friday for 2 hours, no agenda, no objective, just getting them together, talking about what they were doing, what was working, what wasn't working, and so on, okay? So this went on for 4 weeks. They loved it. My guys loved it. They loved it. And so it went on for 4 weeks, and then it was time to move on. We got work to do here. So we got it done. We finished the project on time, went back into the market, and immediately began to capture substantial pieces of the market, okay? Well, this went on for about 3 years, this growth in terms of market share, till finally Roche Laboratories acquired Boehringer Ingelheim, this little $1 billion a year company, 3 years later for $11 billion. So the result of delivering the strategic objective resulted in 3 years' time an $11 billion acquisition. Now I get Christmas cards from the Engelhorn family every year. I mean, they didn't give me a bonus or anything, but at least I get a Christmas card. And so the way this plays out for you is you need to know that the chemistry, which is the center point of the project, the chemistry that went to market and resulted in the $11 billion acquisition was not developed by my chemists. My chemists were unable to resolve the problem, so to speak, but the people in the functional chemistry group did solve it. They were the ones who created the chemistry that went on to lead to an $11 billion acquisition. So if anybody ever tells you, why would I include the information stakeholders in my project planning? That's the answer. Just say $11 billion and they'll probably say, what's that about? And you can tell them that story. 11 billion. That's with a really big B. Strictly because I included information stakeholders. Had I not included them, that project would have never been successful. So the importance of the stakeholder study, the stakeholder management plan, and its linkage to the strategic objectives is beyond important. Okay, so if you're not doing that now, you better get off the spot and do it, because it's going to pay big dividends for you. Now we can't have a session on project delivery, strategic design without touching on tools. And what I want to say here is, what the hell are we doing with all these tools? We got more tools than we know what to do with. If I used all the tools available in the toolbox, there'd be no time to do the project. So I'm going to give you my interpretation of the 3 tools that you must have. And if you add others later on, but these are not negotiable. Okay. First of all, you've got to have that work breakdown structure, that horizontally or that vertically decomposed work breakdown structure. Once you have that, you have the basis for all other things. Remember, foundation of all things project management. So I've got the work breakdown structure. Once I have that, then I must create a critical path schedule. I'm not talking about a Microsoft bar chart schedule, not talking about some graphic fancy illustration. I'm talking about good old basic fundamental work breakdown structure driven critical path schedule. Okay? So that's the second thing. The third thing that I need to have is risk management. The risk management process is critical to my ability to effectively manage my project as it would impact the strategic objectives. So we look at these risks, and what we want to do with risk management is eliminate, to the extent possible, all of those events that could have a negative impact on my project. We want to eliminate or at least mitigate those as soon as possible, so they don't impact my project as we proceed. Remember, the further you get into a project, the more impactful a risk event might be. So those three things: WBS, critical path schedule, and risk management plan. Got to have them. Now, you notice I left one of the items out of the box. And the reason is there's no room in the darn box for common sense, so we just ignore it. Well, get back on that trail of common sense. In my career as a project manager, I got to tell you, common sense probably saved my career a couple of times by thinking about what realistically could be done and then making sure management recognized that. So common sense. That's why I wrote the book, A Project Manager Common Sense Approach. I think it's easy to fall off the trail and get off track to where you're not using common sense and you're so reliant on an information system and all the tools that we've identified that you end up not practicing common sense management. So don't forget that as a part of the concept. Now, if I'm gonna talk about the idea of tying all this together strategically, then we have to, again, just revisit a little bit about a couple of the IT concepts. Now, the waterfall concept, which is sort of fading to the back of the story right now, has been around a long time and incorporated some of the good attributes of the predictive model, and then sort of developed that around the creation and development of IT projects. Okay, the only way I can ever tell for sure if I'm dealing with IT waterfall people is that if they're waterfall people, they're if they're still waterfall people, they're probably pretty old. You've all heard the story, it's old dog, new tricks. It's kind of hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So they'll sort of keep a little bit of presence in terms of waterfall to pick up on those kinds of responsibilities. But this idea of integration becomes very important in the development of IT projects. So the project management approach that's used by 70 to 80% of the IT functions these days, and that probably will grow to practically 100% over the next couple of years, is Agile. Now we have there's variations, there's Agile, there's hybrid, there's just Scrum, there's a disciplined Agile. I mean, there's a lot of modifications to it, but the basic term Agile was created in 2001 at the ski resort called Snowbird in the hills of Utah. Now I'm from Provo, Utah, so I know about those hills, and I know you can have a lot of fun up there. And well, these boys did, but in the meantime, they also created the Agile Manifesto. So that's the driving document. I mean, we have the PMBOK, and they've got the Agile manifesto. So everybody's taken their input and grown it and refined it and used illustrations and so on. But the key thing is to understand there really isn't that significant of a difference. The main difference in traditional project management versus Agile project management is that the Agile concept uses what we call an elaborative development of the requirements. In other words, we start an Agile project, we don't really know what all the requirements are, but yet we're asked to give a defined schedule and a defined cost estimate. Well, with Agile, that we understand going in that we don't know what all the requirements are, and so we get started and we evolve. The requirements evolve based on what we've learned in previous elements of work. So what I want to kind of point out to you, which makes it simple to understand, is the Agile idea, which has led to Scrums, is really developed around the game of rugby. If you look at Agile, and you can imagine for just a minute, everybody getting ready for a scrum, getting in the big circle, grabbing onto each other, being ready. Somebody throws the ball into the middle of the scrum. Now everybody starts pushing and shoving and kicking and biting until finally the ball squirts out. And once it squirts out, we run over and somebody runs over and grabs it and goes as far as they can go before they end up having to do another scrum. Well, that's project management. We do the same thing. We review progress, we modify and adjust, but what we don't do very well is refine requirements as we go, because we think that causes too much change. Well, Agile people welcome that, because what they want to do is deliver value as early as possible. So they want to begin to deliver value to that strategic objective before the project's even completed. So Agile has some interesting benefits. Now, I'm not an Agile person. I looked into getting my Scrum certificate, and it looked easy enough to do. All I need to do is pay $1,000 and listen to 4 days of somebody yapping, and then I can pass a little exam and I'll be Scrum certified. Well, I didn't think that was appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for PMPs either, by the way, but I don't think it was appropriate. I mean, so what? I got my certificate, but I don't really know that much. I never practiced Scrum. I paid $1,000 and got a certificate. So if you're going to become an Agilist, get to immerse yourself in the concepts of Agile, understand them, because frankly, right now, unless I see some change in the next couple of years, Agile is the future. Now, there'll always be predictive. There'll always going to be what I'll call normal project management, because I don't think, although there are people that argue with me, I just read an article about this, that Agile's not going to be used for construction projects or for road development projects and things like that, but Agile is going to be developed for a variety of applications, which obviously includes software development. So I just want to point out to you that if you're a project manager and you're not becoming conversant, at least conversant in Agile concepts, then you're going to be disconnected from the strategic objectives and find yourself wandering around with a project but no place to go. So we want to make sure we work on that to the extent possible. Now, you have a role. You and I have a role to play in this, because our management understands, because we convince them of how important this idea of strategic linkage is and how it should be maintained. And we convince them of that, but then they see the price tag. Then they see that this is going to require a PPM. It's going to require a redesign of the way we do things. It's going to require perhaps a PMO. And all of a sudden, they're not so big on it. Okay. I've seen several, I've been involved in two, false start of what was at that time called enterprise project management. And both of those came as a result of, wow, I didn't know it was going to be this difficult. So we need to make sure they understand it's not easy. No, if it was easy, they wouldn't call it work. It's not easy, but is it worthwhile? Well, absolutely. The return on investment, the strategic objective of implementing a good, solid, sound PPM process is, well, almost immeasurable in many ways. But we've got to convince people of that. We've got to make sure that the bosses recognize that there's no free lunch, that they're going to have to pay for what it is we achieve, and then we can take the role. This is a career opportunity to get involved in this PPM or enterprise project management. So once you've got management's approval, everything's cool. Okay. Now, last slide, and then I'll take some questions. I wanted to point out to you. Remember, I showed you that slide, second slide with the head in the sand. This is a guy with a head in sand. And these are, now I want to make this real because these are real people that I know personally. These are two people I'm going to tell you about. I'm not going to name them, but these two people were extremely good project managers, meaning effective project managers. The scope time, you give them scope time cost, boom, it was going to get done. You had no doubt about that. Well, the problem is they kept allowing themselves to become disconnected from the strategic objectives. So now they're producing a project that really doesn't have the same relative importance that it had in the beginning, but they're focused on scope time cost, man, they're hammering it. And they get it done, and they expect a way to go badge, and then move on to the next project. Well, that's what happened. They did the project. They went in for the discussion with senior level management, and the discussion went something like this. You know, you disconnected from the strategy. About midway through, you started moving in a direction that wasn't supportive of the strategy. We can't have that. We don't have enough resources to do projects just for the sake of doing projects, so you need to stay connected. Okay, yeah, sure, boss. Well, the fact of the matter is he didn't listen. These two, neither one of these two guys listened. And the same thing happened again. So that's the second time. And after the second time, they were asked to take their skills to some other organization. In other words, they got fired. They got fired for not listening, but they really got fired for allowing the project to disconnect from the strategic objectives. So my encouragement for you is, first, find out what strategic objective you support, find out what the relative importance or priority of your project to that strategic objective is, and then execute accordingly. And be prepared to modify, to move, to change. Change is not a bad thing. Change is a good thing if we manage it. Okay, that's all I've got in the way of formal presentation, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Mr. Lee, for this elaborative and fantastic presentation. So I'm sure all the participants have learned so many things. I myself learned so many things, of course. This is a reminder that how strategic design is so important and why project delivery needs to be mapped with strategic objective of company or organization. Only then we project management can create values for the organization, and of course we can thrive. Thanks once again. Now, so if I take questions from the audiences, there are two questions already here. So let me share for you. One is from participant Shueb. He asked the question is, can PMO be strategic office? Can PMO be strategic office for formulating strategy?
Oh, a specific strategic office? Is that what the question is?
Right. Can project management office like PMO can be a strategic office for organization?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've been working with the people in the States on is the real purpose of a PMO. And sometimes I don't think they understand that as well as they could. The problem I had with PMOs is that I always felt like the PMO was a support organization. They provided information that allowed me to do my job more effectively. Well, they've sort of morphed into what I call a Gestapo, sort of a policing function. And if they take on that function, then one of the most critical roles they can play is to help establish and maintain the linkage between individual projects and the organization's strategy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. And another question from participant Bodrul Hassan. What will be the needful if an organization are not keeping aligned between strategic objective and project manager's authority?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the purpose of this presentation, is to point out to you that the result of that happening is chaos, is disaster, is a lot of organizations failing, not because they didn't get projects done, but because they got the wrong projects done.
Thank you. Now we've got a further question is from Shohid Raja. He asked, Agile principle is simplicity. However, disciplined Agile seems too difficult to grab. What do you think the future of Agile in the context of PMBOK?
Well, the PMBOK is as you probably know, the PMBOK's undergoing massive change. The 7th edition has gone from 90% predictive content to 50% predictive and 50% agile. I think with some of these new concepts, they have a half-life, and I'm not sure what the half-life of Agile is, but what happens is people are constantly looking for new ways to do things more efficiently. So Agile may have a half-life of they're already into 20 years. So who knows what the half-life is going to be? But I encourage people to continue to look for better, more effective, more efficient, more cost-efficient ways of delivering projects. So I think that hunt will continue.
Thank you. And another question is again related to Agile. It said, what can be done to make the C-suite embrace Agile and essay that behavior?
Say that last part again. Say the last part again. I didn't catch it.
What can be done to make the C-suite embrace the Agile and act accordingly?
Yeah, that's a good question. Getting people to embrace Agile. If you take somebody like me with 40, 50 years of experience in predictive project management, and one morning I wake up and you tell me that Agile's the way we ought to be doing it, I don't exactly embrace that with warmth. I resist it. And so I think the only way that you can convert, and this is really a conversion, convert someone that's predictive into an Agile supporter is by demonstration, by showing what can be done. And I think the important point of that is that people don't accept things just because you say they're good. They look at it from that process to where they can do. Here's a question I get all the time. People will contact me and say, well, I'm trying to make a decision. I've got the Scrum certification or I've got the PMP. Which one should I get? And here's my answer. Get them both. Get them both, because who's the most experienced person? Who's the most valuable person? It's a person that can deal in any environment. So, but for now, Agile, the last 2 years, Agile's taken us by storm. I mean, it's really been unbelievable how much progress has been made. But I think demonstrated value is the only way to get a convert. If you realize that the idea of converts, really, the fact of the matter is, some of the people that I worry about the most are converts, because once you convert someone, then they become kind of focused on that new approach rather than realizing it's just another approach that I want to roll into my bag of capabilities. But converts, smoking, people who stop smoking, oh, they're the worst, man. They smell smoke in the hallway and they get upset. That's because they've converted to not smoking. 2 weeks ago, they're smoking a pack a day. But now all of a sudden they're a convert to, well, it really works that same way in project management with the Agile approach.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. We have got another question. Who is the best person in the organization to define strategic plan for projects? Who is the best person in the organization to define strategic plan for the projects?
That's a good question. It depends. Well, of course, it depends on what the area of expertise is. What's the technical area of expertise? But what we really need, and I don't think we have it as well as we should, is we need a conversion layer that takes strategy, develops it into products. Because we are dealing with two components. Project management, that's not the same as product management. So there needs to be someone that's responsible for the product that defines that product. Like, for example, we made a big mistake on this project in Germany. Our completion criteria was 50,000 units ready to ship. That was our completion criteria. And we met that. We had the 50,000 units, but the major problem was no one was managing the product, and so no one had made arrangements for the distribution of those 50,000 units to the environment. So that role, I get that role a lot. What's the difference between product and project? There's quite a bit. But the product management, a lot of their work comes after the project management's done with their role. But they also play a part up front in defining that project so that the project manager delivers what's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. So now with this, I have my question for you. So okay. What is the two most important attributes a project manager must have to become a successful project manager in career? What do you think with your long experience? What are the two attributes project manager should target to be familiar with to become successful project manager?
That's a good question. That's a good question. The first one's kind of easy for me in that I think at the end of the day, no matter what all these things we've been talking about, at the end of the day, communications is the secret. I mean, I can overcome bad planning or any. I can overcome that with communications, effective communications. Okay, that's to understand. And then the second one is the attributes of a good project manager. The key one for me is to have the ability to recognize I can't do everything. So being able to delegate. Here's the way I look at delegate. In fact, I'll tell you honestly, one of the reasons I got into project management is in the early days, some guy told me, he said, you need to get into project management because he said, project managers don't do work. Well, hell, that sounded good to me because I don't like work. And so I thought, well, that's a good idea. That's what I should do. It was a little while before I realized what he meant by that is that I don't do physical work. Mental work is unbelievably crazy, but physical work, no. I get my work done through others. If you ever come to my office and you see me working, something's wrong. Because I should be overseeing and talking to and communicating with people. I don't think any work gets done with a project manager who sits in his office.
Thank you for answering that. So first thing is, of course, communication. Another is delegation or empowering teams. Yep. It is very important from your perspective that we become successful project manager. Now we are already overrunning our session today. Thanks to Mr. Lee. And we have got a few other questions, but probably these will be last question for you.
Last question, okay.
Yeah. How enterprise architecture contribute in project strategy? How an organization architecture or enterprise architecture contribute in project strategy?
Well, I think, this topic of organizational configuration comes up all the time. And I think, I think there are some minor differences that may add value to project management. But I think by the time I get down to the project management level, if I've gone through the strategic objective exercise and I've converted those objectives into products or outputs, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I think it needs to have separate recognition of strategic objectives, managing of strategic objectives, but it also needs to have that product development interface. Okay. Now, in 1981, a guy named Paul Dinsmore, who's another PMI fellow who lives in Rio de Janeiro, lives in Houston, but works in Rio de Janeiro, he wrote a book in 81 called Managing Projects by Organization. And the book was way ahead of its time because he talked about the specific things we've been discussing in 1981. The environment wasn't ready for that kind of discussion in 1981. Now that book would be it'd be perfect. He ought to reissue the damn book because he'd sell a bunch of them, because it really focused on exactly what we've been talking about, how from the bottom up, it's all about projects. If projects don't get done, strategy doesn't get achieved. And so that point was made well by Paul, but unfortunately, as I said, he was probably 10 years or more ahead of his time.
With that, now I would like to again request Mr. Lee to say his final words for all of us. And also I would like to thanks all the volunteers, all the participants. And after we hear Mr. Lee's final comments for PMA Bangladesh chapter and members, we will be ending this session. Over to Mr. Lee again for your final comments.
Thank you. This final comments are easy with groups like this. The interest that you show to take, I know it's only an hour out of your day, but it demonstrates that you have an interest to expand your knowledge level. And you reach out and suck the brain of anybody you can find that'll talk to you about better ways of doing project management. Learning never stops. I'm 74 years old, and I would tell you, because of my LinkedIn work, really, I learn something every day. Pretty soon I'm going to be so smart, my head's going to explode. So you really have to focus on learning constantly, look for opportunities, be helpers of young people coming up, be mentors of those people so that their level of effort improves and everyone improves as a continuum. So anything I can do to add value to that process, I'm all for it. And I appreciate you asking me. I'll look forward to another opportunity we can interact with one another.
Thank you so much. Now let us take a picture with Mr. Lee, with all the participants. So everyone is requested to put your video on and put your smile on, of course. And also you can have some kind of wave or anything you like, so that we make a fun picture.
Okay, so I'm taking the picture. Done.
Thanks, everyone. And once again, thanks to Mr. Lee. Thanks for everyone's participation. It was a great session, and we look forward to all of your participation in the next session.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith.